everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to talk about an article that I recently saw in my email inbox. I don't recall subscribing to the New York Times email list, but I guess at some point I must have, because the subject line for this one really caught my eye. A sexless happy marriage. Did my eyes deceive me? Could the New York Times really be exploring what I assume to be ace and queer platonic relationships? I mean, maybe they'd even talk about kink as an alternative expression of intimacy, as I so often do. Could I dare to dream? Well, actually, I tried not to. Regular viewers may remember the last time I talked about a New York Times article, it was because they were begging people to have more sex. Yes, really. So, I doubted they would change their tune so dramatically in just a year, but I was intrigued nonetheless, and the article was not exactly what I was expecting, to say the least, so I want to talk about it. Can a sexless marriage be a happy one? And what do they even mean by a sexless marriage in the first place? So, what I want to go over first here is, and I don't think I did this the first time around I covered a New York Times article, but in this day and age, I believe it is beneficial to look into who is writing articles like this. There is always going to be some kind of bias or angle with a writer, and when we go into one of the articles, we want to know what that bias or what that angle is going to be up front. So our author this time around is Amanda Monte, who I have never heard of before. Maybe you all are familiar with her work. She seems to be an author who has also taught and lectured at several universities, and her work seems to be focused more on topics like motherhood, cultural criticism, and female autonomy. So she seems like the kind of person I would expect to maybe be sympathetic about the pressure to have sex in a relationship and the ace experience more broadly. Though, my hope for this was tempered by the fact that there have been about, like a dozen viral articles lately about polyamory, none of which, to my knowledge, are written by actual polyamorous people, and even feminists and queer women have struggled putting their ire away while writing those articles, or so it seemed like. So I was nervous going into this. I did not know if it would fully connect or if it would be more like those other articles about polyamory. So, what did Amanda have to say about sexless marriages? The article headline reads, "Experts and couples are challenging the conventional wisdom that sex is essential to relationships." And I wondered initially if the article was going to live up to that standard. You all will see my conclusion to that as we go along. Now, to ensure that I am not taking anything in this article out of context, I am going to try to not leave anything important out. I may skip some sections of the article just for time, but you can find the entire work linked down below if you want to read it in full. So, without further ado, our story begins, quote, "Rose was drawn to how stable Will seemed. So unlike the other men she had dated, who dreaded commitment. Their relationship survived multiple moves, about a year of long-distance dating, and the challenges of finding time to be together while living with parents and roommates. Now, 7 years into their marriage, they have their own place, a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles, where Rose sees Pilates clients. Will is gone during the day, teaching, and at night they cuddle in bed and watch television. It's my favorite part of the day, Rose says. As much as Will grounds her, Rose feels that the familiar calm of their relationship also shuts her down sexually. They go months without sex, but they don't lack intimacy. They have a policy of never refusing a hug, something they instituted to resolve the minor disagreements that inevitably crop up in any relationship. They have also talked candidly about how, for her, the safe predictability of their marriage, the quality she loves about their lives together, dulls her sex drive. She knows that can be confusing, even frustrating for Will, but she doesn't like the idea of forcing herself to have sex. Rose's mother, now divorced, felt obligated to have sex with Rose's father once a week. That's not the kind of relationship Rose wants. And the story ends there for now. I want to share my thoughts on just this little opening bit. And to me, so far, this sounds like a standard dead bedroom story. Marriage makes things feel a little stale. Sex falls by the wayside, life gets busy and complicated, and in a good situation, no one feels forced to do anything, but it is still frustrating and confusing for the other partner, if not both people. And to me, it does not sound like they are willingly choosing to have a sexless marriage, to do something radical and to challenge relationship norms, so much as they are merely accepting they have one, they have a dead bedroom or a lulled sex life, and they are trying as best they can to learn how to tolerate it. And I mean, I guess it's an improvement versus caving to the weekly obligation of sex that other previous generations have felt, but I'm not sure how I feel about it so far. But before I share my full thoughts, let's go ahead and read some more of the article. It continues, quote, "To get into a sexual mood, Rose relies on a set of rituals to help build anticipation. Doing her hair and makeup, shaving her legs, having a glass of wine over dinner, or, when their schedules allow, going on vacation to break out of their routines. Will doesn't need to do anything to feel ready for sex, and Rose sees this as another way in which they're different. Over the years, they have accepted that this is what their sex life looks like and will look like if they want to be together, which they do. During the pandemic, the couple went more than a year without having sex, but they savored their extra time together. Rose used to spend hours driving in traffic to different workout studios, coming home late, not seeing her husband much. Stuck at home, they took walks around their neighborhood. They talked constantly. They started taking online yoga classes together, a hobby that stuck. Will appreciates these smaller opportunities to connect. Rose thinks she's not the nurturing type, but Will disagrees. Quote, "She's not stingy in spirit or time," he says. Sometimes they shower together and hold each other naked without any expectation of sex. Though Will remains hopeful that these moments will lead to something else, he doesn't push it. So, on the one hand, this does seem to fall in line with what I know about sex and relationship therapy. I am not a therapist, but this is just what I know of it from the books that I've read. If you want sex to happen, don't push it. A lot of people, especially women in marriages, do get turned off and they withdraw from sex if they feel like every hug and every kiss is an opening salvo to try to get to sex rather than always being an expression of love and romantic affection. But on the other hand, and maybe this is just me reading into things, the vibe I get so far at this point in the article is very much, wow, can you believe these people aren't having sex regularly, even though the husband clearly still wants it, and somehow they love each other enough to not get divorced like it's some kind of freaking miracle? I mean, talk about the bar being in hell, right? They might agree with the idea that sex is not essential for a relationship, but even from this, I would imagine that Will at least would be a lot happier if it was more regular, right? Is that genuine acceptance, or is this a sort of more reluctant, this is the best I'm gonna get, I gotta put up with it because the alternative is being alone and I don't want to have to get divorced, and that would be even worse? That is not exactly challenging norms. I mean, I would argue That kind of is the norm for a lot of people. I'd have expected this quote to maybe go a little bit more like, sex used to be really important to us in our marriage, but as time has gone on and we have different ways of expressing our love for each other, it's not something I miss in the way that you might assume. That would be the kind of thing I would expect to read if I was going to be making an article or interviewing people that have happy and challenging sexless marriages that go against the status quo. But no, let's just slow down here for a second. I don't want to be too hasty. Let's go ahead and keep reading. So we continue. Quote, during the 1990s, a new wave of sex positivity coincided with the ascendancy of different forms of therapy, including couples counseling. Experts coached couples on how to strengthen their marriages, often relying on the belief that healthy relationships included consistent sex with partners. By the 2010s, appointment sex had become one popular method for maintaining intimacy and, somewhat implicitly, safeguarding against separation. Online groups have sprung up for couples who challenge basic assumptions that spouses should share a bedroom or even a home. Sharon Hyman, who runs a Facebook group called A Partners for couples who have chosen to live separately, told me that many of the members in her community find their sex lives improve when they don't spend every minute together. My goal is to show that there are healthy options for relationships, Hyman says. No one size fits all. Speaking of this, I have seen a few headlines this year talking about women living together, usually without men, in order to raise kids as a community. In fact, I actually think the New York Times themselves did an article about this one too, and they called them, and I do not like this term, mommunes. Can we workshop that one a little bit more? I think we need to go back to the drawing board on that one. And, it is nice to see that alternative living arrangements for spouses and co-parents are growing outside of just polyamory and more like woo-woo spiritual commune type scenarios. I actually remember myself being an adult and being very confused the first time I had a friend whose parents slept in separate rooms, even though they were actually still in the same house and they were still married. I mean, looking back on it, logistically, it made sense. One of the parents apparently snored very loudly and had a different sleep schedule. But even that seemed radical and unthinkable to my 18-year-old brain. Certainly, the married couple sleeping together in the same bedroom idea is not going to work for everyone, even as it is shown as the only option for real married people who truly love each other. But, with that being said, which is something I feel like I'm going to be saying a lot today, this feels like another part of the article that's trying to say, look, married couples can stay together without sex. They can overcome that massive and torturous challenge. But at the end, it still seems like at least half the point is to discover things that bring back the spark in the bedroom. Are we really proving that sex isn't essential to relationships if heterosexual, allosexual couples are staying married but getting separate homes in part because the sexual spark isn't there when they live together? And then it comes back when they don't live together, which is something they're trying to work towards. The message to me here feels much closer to sex becomes more frequent when you stop trying to make it happen, rather than you don't need sex in order to be happily married. I kind of get the sense that they're implying lack of sex weakens someone's desire to cohabitate. Couldn't someone read this part of the article and get the impression that this proves how important sex is for maintaining a close bond? That it can be something that destroys a relationship and then it gets better once you leave, and then that's a positive and proves how important sex is to begin with for a lot of people? Which, to be clear, it is, but I thought we're trying to prove that it's not for everyone. But before I get too much into a rant, let's go ahead and keep going with the article. Quote, one effect of the ever-changing sexual climate is that many couples today are simply less willing to tolerate what the psychotherapist Esther Perel calls boredom in the bedroom. Perel has made it a career of articulating how domestic overexposure saps eroticism, which requires some intrigue, mystery, and unfamiliarity. That's not to suggest that long-term love and desire are impossible, but according to Perel, keeping sexual interest alive requires getting creative. In her podcast, Where Should We Begin?, Perel helps couples explore and articulate their fantasies, honor each other as individuals, and experiment with new approaches to fulfilling their desires together. I hope that what Perel is saying here is that desires can go beyond just having sex. I feel like this would have been the perfect time in this article to talk about how kink can be an alternative way for couples to bond. But the article doesn't go there. Instead, this ends up sounding still like we are focusing on how to get the spark back, how to revive your dead marriage, or at least have something of a sex life, even if it's not the traditional PIV you had in yesteryear times. Again, supposedly, we are supposed to be talking about radically challenging the centrality of sex in a marriage. So why are we once again mourning the loss of eroticism that can come with a deeply bonded domestic life for some people? That sure makes it sound like it's a problem we are trying to solve rather than an expectation we are trying to challenge. Is anyone else picking up on this? But continuing on, quote, for Perel, as for many other relationship experts, that sometimes means re-examining investment in another foundational premise of marriage, monogamy. The advice columnist Dan Savage, too, has argued that monogamy isn't entirely plausible or pleasurable for everyone and is critical of Americans' obsession with moralizing infidelity. He encourages married people to be honest with each other about how hard it is to carry the responsibility of fulfilling their partner's sexual and emotional needs for decades on end. And here it is. I was wondering when polyamory would come into the fore of this conversation. After all, it's a topic du jour, and we surely need yet another non-polyamorous writer covering it. Don't we, folks? I mean, I think Dan Savage is non-monogamous himself, and I have a few problems with him, and it's disappointing to see him referenced here, considering that his views on asexuals and asexuality are what they are. Not that this article talks about asexuality regardless either, which is just strange considering that the whole piece is about, supposedly, allegedly, couples who have happy marriages who do not have sex. You think that would be the first place you would go, but no, that's not where we're going. So instead, let's talk about married couples forgoing monogamy as yet another solution to solve the problem of not having enough sex in their marriage. I agree. It is a lot of pressure to have one person be your only source of pleasure and emotional support and all the other stuff for decades and decades. I am polyamorous myself, as many of you know, but rather than accepting that this can lead to a life together that is focused outside of the bedroom, we're doing yet more problem solving to avoid the terrible, horrible issue that is not having regular sex with your spouse. The norm that we are trying to challenge and say isn't actually that big of a deal, except we keep reinforcing it for some reason. Anyways, continuing, quote, while some are questioning the standard of monogamous sex in marriage by exploring polyamorous and open relationships, others are pushing back against the pressure to have sex at all. Platonic life partners, meanwhile, friends who commit to owning a home and even raising children together, insist that sex and romance are not necessary to lifelong unions. And, oh my God, here it is. The light at the end of the tunnel, baby. I thought we would never get here. Sadly, though, we do not end up dwelling on this point, or I don't know, interviewing a couple who is in a platonic life partnership, because we gotta keep talking about heterosexual, married, allosexual people in regular vanilla marriages instead. But I am going to savor this moment while it lasts. Just let it be there. I really feel like this should have been more of the focus of the article, like talking about people who either begin their relationships as intentionally platonic only, or maybe couples who moved into happy, healthy, platonic, romantic arrangements at some point. Like, I don't know, somebody discovers that they're biromantic but homosexual. Like, that's a thing we could explore, but apparently we're not going to go there. As well, interestingly, there's not a mention of queer platonic relationships, or QPRs, which would have fit very well in this article. Although, I guess in a QPR you could also include sex, although QPRs are not inherently sexual by their nature. So it's really sad to see such a big missed opportunity like this in a newspaper of this size. I mean, how many people could have read this article and been introduced to that concept for the first time ever? Maybe somebody could have found a term for a thing they desired but didn't have the language to know how to ask for it. I mean, what a shame, really. But instead of going into that, we have to talk about yet another sex educator and their solutions for a broken sexual bond. So, into the fire, yet again, we go. The sex educator and researcher Emily Nagoski is resistant to the idea that frequent sex should be a chief component of every committed relationship. Nagoski, who has been open about her own hiatus from marital sex, doesn't endorse obligatory sex, nor does she encourage aiming for any sexual baseline in terms of regularity or behavior. Drawing on the work of Canadian sexologist Peggy Kleinplatz, Nagoski believes that low desire can sometimes be evidence of good judgment. Quote, "It's not dysfunctional not to want sex you don't like," Nagoski says. In her new book, Come Together, Nagoski urges couples who want to explore their sexualities and deepen their sexual bond to begin by figuring out what each person wants when they want sex. For many, sex represents freedom from the ordinary, but what it takes to get there will look different for every couple and is likely to change over time. After all, desires don't always align, or they evolve in unexpected ways. Don't get me wrong here. I'm being a little bit sassy when I talk about going over what yet more sex educators have to say, but I do like what I have seen of Nagoski's work. I haven't actually read any of her books yet. Disclaimer, so I don't know everything about everything there, but I like what I have seen of it, and I appreciate that she says low desire can be a good thing, and that it's not dysfunctional to not want sex that you don't like. That is a good message. I just, it's frustrating for the point to always go back to if you want to deepen your sexual bond, if you want to fix things in the bedroom, and not like, I don't know, how you can have a healthy, happy relationship outside of sex. What bonding things do you do that are not sex? Rather than using seemingly anything and everything else as a tool to try and get more and better sex to happen, like not living together anymore or pursuing polyamory. Maybe they think the answer to being happy outside of sex is obvious and therefore everyone else knows about it already, but the impression I get is that there is an underlying belief here in a sort of like natural limit to how happy a relationship can be without sex. Like if you can only reach 70 out of 100 happiness if you do everything else right, but those last 30 points have to come from sex. And 70, that can be bearable. It can be doable. It's a passing grade, maybe. You can be content with 70 out of 100 and avoid divorce, but it's not joyful. So where are the stories of couples who are joyful, passionate, and loving towards each other without sex? Amanda, I am begging you, please go there. But Instead, we are given this. Quote, Michelle and John share a one-bedroom with their daughter, and while they get some privacy during the day, they're busy working from home. Now, most days, Michelle masturbates in the morning, while John takes their daughter to preschool. He masturbates at night in the bathroom while watching porn on his phone. For John, it's merely a physical release. But for Michelle, pleasuring herself serves a different purpose. She is trying to figure out what makes her feel good. Exploring her changed body alone eliminates the guilt she has when she can't climax with her husband. She doesn't want him to think it has anything to do with him. I want to get there, but it's not getting there, she says. And I'm gonna skip over the next little bit of the article because there's multiple other stories after this one that are, from what I can recall, all from people that are heterosexual, married, and they all have kids, and they feel like having kids did change their sex lives forever. Many of them report that there is a mismatch in desire, that one partner wants to feel wanted, but the other partner is not in the mood or isn't comfortable because of trauma or bodily changes, all of which is totally valid. And in Michelle and John's story and in the others, there still seems to be this sense that they think something is missing, that they are lost, that there is something they need to recover and work towards getting to, and they are simply making do with the best they can muster in the interim. And this is definitely going to be me inferring things here, but Michelle doesn't sound like she just is exploring herself because that is what she wants to be doing on her own and that's it, but also because she is trying to work out an understanding of her own experience of pleasure so then she can go and take that back into interactions with her husband to be able to alleviate guilt. And maybe that's a messaging she has on her own. Maybe he told her that, I don't know, but it's clearly not just for her, but also for him as well. And the sense I get is that it's maybe not unhappy outright. These couples aren't unhappy per se, but the mood being relayed by the author here doesn't even come across as really neutral. Except for maybe this one couple that I do want to talk about. So let's talk about them. Quote, one night in bed, about 10 years after she went on a hormone treatment for her cancer that put her into early menopause, they had a frank conversation about their sex life. We discussed my lack of desire, and he said that if I'm not turned on, then he's not either, Emily says. He admitted that his sex drive had dipped too. So they decided not to force it. She feels there's some cultural pressure for older people to keep up their sex lives into their 80s. She's read, with skepticism, articles claiming that maintaining sex later in life is healthy. Is it? She says. I don't know. Emily feels their marriage has progressed naturally. They experience decades of passion, and while they remain affectionate outside of the bedroom, their relationship now transcends sex in many ways. It's about the life they've built together. We've been in a sexless relationship for years now, Emily says. We get along great, but we're more like best buds than lovers. And this, to me, seems to be the best example out of the bunch of a genuinely sexless marriage that has actually accepted it and is okay with it. And I imagine this is partly the case because they both have a lower level of desire and they feel happy and fulfilled in their other interactions. They have transcended the need for sex. And there's not that tension of one person hoping and praying that something is going to happen, there's going to be a breakthrough or a change, and they're counting down the days until the next scheduled sex appointment. It's very interesting how they talk about people feeling pressured to have sex, though, especially women, through their entire lives and marriage and having kids. But yet, as I have already mentioned, this article never quotes, never talks to anyone who is asexual. You know, the group of people who are the most likely to experience the most intense form of that pressure? Is it not just like a half step over into talking about asexuality? I don't know. But even if this article bills this as tales from couples who are bucking societal trends, it is still clear from the writing that they are trapped in heterosexual expectations about sex. Quote, for couples measuring themselves against what Nagoski calls the fictions of sex, or for those worried that their relationship is on the line whenever they enter the bedroom or don't meet some monthly number, there may be too much pressure for sex to be enjoyable. It's more important that couples establish what kind of sex is worth having. Rose admits to feeling the weight of societal expectations. Recently, she decided that since she and Will were rarely having sex, she would have her birth control implant removed from her arm. During the procedure, the nurse intimated that there was something wrong with Rose's marriage. Rose felt shamed and angry. The idea that she should be living in a constant state of arousal with her husband after a decade together is to her ridiculous, and also part of a facade she thinks many married couples maintain. And then from there, she goes on to explain that a therapist is helping her explore whether ADHD may be contributing to her feeling of boredom and her inability to sexually desire Will. It's hard to shake the feeling that this could be yet more medicalization, framing a lack of desire again as a problem for couples to solve all of the time in every case, and this is simply what married couples have to go through. But the article ends, quote, Will sometimes turns to Buddhist writings on restraint to explore his sexuality. He jokes there may be some confirmation bias at work, but he thinks his wife's self-awareness and her unwillingness to force herself into sex that she doesn't want to have has matured him. For Will, intimacy is less about completion and more about connection. I've learned, even just about the act of sex itself, the ending is not always the best part, Will says. There's pleasure throughout the spectrum. In March, for Rose's 40th birthday, they took a trip to Hawaii. She switched off her phone for hours as they sprawled out by the ocean. Will remembers turning towards his wife and staring at her, watching her relaxing, her body loose. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about sex or how beautiful Rose looked under the sun. He was thinking about how similar they actually are. More than anything, they want to enjoy themselves in their own way, to savor the small moments when they can let the rest of the world fade away. And that is where the article ends, and boy, y'all, I'm just confused. I am plain cornfused. I don't know what. I'm not sure. My understanding is that authors for news articles like this do not get to pick their own titles. And so this could maybe be a disconnect between the author and the editor picked a headline and a description that did not actually match the true intentions of the author. So I don't want to blame Amanda for this article, but it is very interesting that you would have this whole article that you're selling as being about, can a sexless marriage be happy? And supposedly the answer is going to be yes, and people are challenging these norms. But you don't ever really get the sense that most of the people talking about this are happy or joyful or like rejuvenated in their marriages, or they let go of like this really big weight around their shoulders. Like there's no moment of, yeah, we pressured each other for so long to have sex and we realized that neither one of us really cared about it, and so we stopped doing it, and now we have amazing times with, our grandchildren or going boating or like whatever it is that people do in their free time that is not just boinking all over the place in the marital bedroom. But I don't, like, there's there's a disconnect that I find to be very uncomfortable, and especially as an ace person and a polyamorous person as well. Like, I know that you can have a happy marriage without sex, and I know people in my life that have those relationships. I know other ace people that are married that have those relationships, and why didn't the article go there? And I know for people that are not asexual, and I've heard this many times from people, that sex is critically important in a relationship, in a marriage, for it to work long term. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, or like your relationship is lesser if sex is important to you. But if we are going to say that we have examples of relationships that are bucking trends, and then the entire article is kind of showing how most of them are desperately trying whatever they can do to get more sex out of their relationships, or whatever like techniques they can do. Like, there's a difference between being like, I'm gonna take the pressure off because I think that might be something that leads to more sex happening, and let's just stop trying it all. Let's focus on other things in our relationship, and we legitimately do not care if sex ever happens again. And I feel like we got way more in the former and not so much of the latter. And I just, swing and a miss. The whole article, swing and a miss. So painful. Such a missed opportunity the whole way through. And like, I think the interviews are interesting, and I'm not like in any way critiquing the quality of the writing itself or the composition of the article, but it's the combination of the content with the title and what it was sold as that just doesn't sit right with me. So I don't know. I am an ace person, and also I'm kinky and poly and like many other things. And I know so deeply, so many different ways that you can have not just a like passively acceptable, like not so bad, we're gonna get divorced marriage. Like, I know people that have like blissful marriages, amazing, wonderful, connected relationships and partnerships without having sex. And it's like, why can't we talk about that? I think it would actually be really challenging to have an article that talked about how people maintained healthy, happy, super emotionally connected relationships without including sex. Because I think that's where a lot, especially like younger married people, they don't know how to deal with that. Like, when they get to the time period where maybe there's kids or job changes or stress or medical stuff going on that makes it so sex isn't happening, like that can implode a lot of marriages. And I think giving people tools to know, like, hey, this is some other stuff you can do to build your bond together that's not sex, that feels like really valuable information to me. So I don't know. There was like so much missed work we could have done in here about like disability and medical stuff and medical trauma and like how that affects sexuality and desire, and we just didn't get there. We did not get to so many things, and it's just sad. It's just sad. So anyways, I'm gonna stop ranting because this is gonna be like an hour-long video if I don't, but I hope that you all enjoyed this. I do like reading through these articles from time to time because, oh Lord, the writers, they sure are writing these days, aren't they? They're really putting it all out there, talking about polyamory and asexuality and marriages and kink and so many things without seemingly talking to anybody of any of those identities or groups. So, yay! Representation? No. Anyways, all right. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this and you have not already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related subjects, as well as asexuality, dating, relationships, polyamory, so on and so forth. If you like this video, I'd just love to know your thoughts in a comment down below because I'm sure there will be many thoughts about this article because it's quite thought-provoking. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.